Good morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning into Mysterium. We have a full lineup of events today, kicking off with a talk with Stephan Martiniere. You'll likely know Stephan for his work as the art director on URU and Myst V, but you've almost certainly seen his work elsewhere. He's been involved in games, blockbuster films, books, theme parks. He has an impressive library of work, and we're extremely excited to have him here today. So everyone, please welcome Stephan, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, and hello everyone. And first thing I gotta say, given these situation worldwide, is I hope everybody's keeping safe. So it's definitely a very challenging time, and I'm honored to be part of that panel and get the chance to not obviously seeing you, but at least answer some of your questions, and some of you might learn a little bit more about me and what I've done during my career. I kind of started off when I was about 19 in France, and I was fresh out of art school. I had done 4 years of art school from age 15 to 18, 19. And then, I kind of jumped to an animation school in Paris called Les Gobelins, which I'm sure a lot of you know, because I wanted to continue. And I really wanted to become a comic book artist at the time, but the closest thing I could find out there in terms of schooling, because I was not ready to leave school, was to try animation. And I really didn't know that would be the launching pad and the start of my career without really realizing it. One thing led to another, and that's always the surprise of life, as things happen. So from animation school, I didn't even finish my school because I got a summer job and got lucky to land a gig that sent me to Japan to work on Inspector Gadget. And that I didn't know at the time, how big that thing was going to become. I was just hired for 1 month to help out designing some props and characters and backgrounds, sent to Japan, which was a great experience for me, and realized that this was going to be the start of my career. 1 month turned into 2 to 4, 6, and then finally they decided that they wanted me to stay, with the company. And that company became, one of the, if not the biggest company of animation, TV animation in the world in a span of almost like 5 years, very, very quickly. And so they opened up branches, in Los Angeles. And I found myself traveling to the US for the first time. And the US was a big, big change in my life. I mean, Japan was already a shock in the first place, but the US opened up, a whole new world of possibilities. And so what happened is, I started getting more and more involved with the company, developing, TV series, Heathcliff, Chess and the Wheel Warriors, and a whole bunch of them. And during that period of about 8 years, traveling back and forth between the US and Japan, since, all the pre-production was mainly done in the US and the production done in Japan, we were kind of being dispatched, wherever there was some needs. And I was really free at the time, and I wanted to discover, different cultures in different countries and different ways and approach of work. I mean, I was very excited. These were beginning years of my career for me. And so at some point, I decided that US was more appropriate for me and the path I wanted to follow, because I was very interested in the storytelling aspect of my work. Always was, since I always wanted to do comic books, but never realized it fully until I got into animation. And so animation got me interested in wanting to become a director, which happens a few years after me being, traveling back and forth and working on numerous series for the company. So I started directing animation, for a TV series. And what happened is during all these years, I kind of realized that, doing TV animation, especially that period, was really a work of creating product to endorse toys a lot. And that got tedious at points and tiring. And I got lucky to land a small animation project called Madeline, which was based on Bemelman's books. And I did not know what to think about it at the time, but I was given pretty much carte blanche to do whatever I wanted with that and create an adaptation, a musical adaptation of that little story. And that just opened up a lot of things for me, because I realized how enjoyable, the storytelling and being able to give 200% of yourself into a project without having to think about a toy product or a merchandising attached behind it, how enjoyable that process could be. To the point that after finishing that series animation, I decided to quit animation because I realized if I was to continue, I was going to be doing again, endorsement toys and product that might not necessarily be as crazy, enjoyable and fulfilling, as Madeline had been. So I went to work for a theme park because I was interested in going back to design, and the theme park industry was intriguing to me. And I got an opportunity from a friend of mine who had worked with me on Madeline, who was working at Landmark Entertainment. So I joined a team then, started a career working on theme park, and was sent again to Japan, which was very comfortable at that point since I had been there several years already. And from there, I'm starting to, appreciate a different aspect of the industry, which was very interesting. And then at that point, things started to change. I started to get more and more in touch with other people in the industry, getting more comfortable with my life in the US and get in touch with a lot more people and other aspects, and started to get interested in film and TV, and then the earthquake happened. And the earthquake here in 94, I believe was. And that was a big push for me. So I decided to leave LA. I was not feeling very safe there anymore. And I had a daughter. I was very young, so I didn't think that was the right place. So moved out of LA in Northern California and started for the first time a career in freelance. Since until that time, I was really working for companies. And as my freelance was trying to evolve, I was discovering new clients and new projects. I was introduced to the game industry because at the beginning, you have to remember, the game was a very, very small industry. I mean, you're talking about Mario Brothers and the Donkey Kong, very basic video games. That was the market, except Cyan. Cyan had created that first game, Myst, and to everyone, and me included, that was the beginning of a very interesting adventure, because at the beginning, when I discovered Cyan, I said, wow, these guys are really doing something really different and really interesting, given the context of the game industry that was very basic and simple. But I was not yet quite ready to think more than that and just of like playing the game, but not necessarily thinking there could be a career, especially an art career in that industry. I remember it was very, very young, and the graphics were not very, very pushed and complicated. But then Riven happened, and that changed everything. When I saw Riven, I realized this is an industry that is going to be exploding, because if now the visual can be at the disposal of games and produce a quality of that level, that is going to be a game changer. And sure enough, at the time, right after Riven, Cyan started to post a job posting for an art director. And interestingly enough, at the time, there was no game magazine. But since I was in the film industry, or at least in contact with a lot of people, I was buying the Cinefex magazine. Cinefex was the only magazine of the entertainment at the time, or at least one of the very few. And they advertised for an art director in that little magazine stuff. So I called because I says, wow, I mean, I've always loved what these people are doing and the technology and how creative, and visual the whole project was. And so I met Rand, and honestly, I mean, it took pretty much a day. We started to chat, and I think we really connected in terms of how, we visualized, games and what the world of game could be, and especially the narrative aspect of a game, which was never a big thing at the time, But Ren was very, very much into storytelling, and I was, because that was the beginning of my career, and I always wanted, to continue telling stories, even visually. So we really connected, and I joined the team, and I realized at the time they were trying to develop a big product called URU, which was going to be a new project with, opening up all the worlds that had been hinted, in Myst and Riven. And so there was a potential for creativity to develop these unusual and unknown world, and I said, this is great. I mean, this is incredible, because, everything is possible, with a storytelling that had already started Myst and Riven, the potential of going beyond and developing something, visually extremely fulfilling was exciting to me. And so I worked with them for about 4 or 5 years, developing all these different worlds and exploring different ideas, constantly working with Rand, trying to create challenging, mysteries and try to participate as much as I could in terms of its storytelling. And since I was approaching it from a visual standpoint, there was a really deep connection about how you visualize something and try and tell a story. And since everything is about, puzzle solving, that was just perfect. Then, as you all know, Cyan, moved on and Ubisoft stepped in and I moved on. And so I continued my career since I had started already, working with pretty much every aspect of the industry. I jumped and started working on more films. Star Wars was a big jump for me at some point. I always was a big fan of Star Wars, and given the opportunity to work on the film, was incredible. So I jumped on that, worked on Star Wars, and started to create a career for me of being more and more involved in the film industry. Worked on, numerous films. I mean, if you've seen the portfolio of my work, it's out there. Films like, Virus and Total Recalls and 300, it's like a lot of very interesting and challenging projects. And then during all that time, because I was freelance, I was continuing my career and contact and work in the film park industry. Got heavily involved with Walt Disney in developing theme parks across the world on various different projects. The biggest one being the Shanghai projects, redesigning the Pirates of the Caribbean, the Island of Adventures, and then moved on to work on the Star Wars theme park project as well, because Disney acquired, the whole Star Wars license as well as the Marvel license, which got me also to work on the theme park aspect of some of the film I had worked, like the Avengers, and Spider-Man and things like that. So that everything was kind of like coming back to as a loop, which was very intriguing. And so I've been doing that now for the last, I would say, 15 plus years, doing establishing my studio, doing freelance work for all these different industries. And as well, I should mention, starting also a career doing some book covers, because I always was curious about what it is to be a book cover artist. And so that's something that I keep on doing all the time, as well, alongside, working for film and theme parks, and as well as developing other types of work that are, enjoyable. I'm now currently in France. I was lucky, I guess, to catch one of the last flights to get the French people out of the US. Not that I really wanted to, but I think it was an appropriate time given the situation in the US. So my studio is here now, and I'll certainly, will move back and go back, to the US on a regular basis. But this is where I am right now, enjoying, the life and the work here, working on different projects, currently on a big theme park, which I can't tell you much of it. Just finished working on the Foundation series, a TV series for Apple TV that's going to be released next year. And working on another Marvel project, which I can't tell you anything about as well, NDA and things, I'm sure you know. But that's pretty much it, so if there is pretty much, if there's any question now, I think we can certainly jump into that and answers, some things you'd like to know more about me.
Cool. That's a great introduction. Thank you. So did you start, it sounds like you started as a fan of science games before you
Yes.
got involved with them?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, as a fan, like I was a fan of Star Wars, like I was a fan of all the comic books and got to work on movies. I mean, which in some ways is what makes the process of working, especially as an artist on project like this, is if you already approach them from the fact that you love them, you love the project, you love the license and the characters of the world, it makes the process and the work much more enjoyable. Yes.
So when you were working with Rand to design the worlds, how did integrating puzzles and story affect your artistic design versus something where you're just working towards a visual look that doesn't have puzzles and so forth?
Well, it was always a very collaborative and creative process. So Rand would come to me and says, "This is an idea for that world, or this is the story behind the world. This is the mystery that we're going to try to unravel." So I had the basic guidelines of what that world wanted to be and reveal, but then there was really no specific visual attached to that. It was just the idea of a narrative aspect and how he was interested in navigating that world of the mystery and how he wanted to have it unfolded. And so I started thinking pretty much from a blue sky perspective, blank slate. So okay, so what with that idea, what would make it intriguing, interesting, and inspiring, and what could challenge, the player. And so it was pure creation. I was coming up with all these different ideas, on sketch paintings and what have you, and show that to Rand, when I had something that I thought, was an interesting, idea to go with. And, it's what I was saying at the beginning. I think Rand and I, we really connected well. And so there was never an idea or a visual aspect that I was offering that was really never rejected. Rand was always interested in being very open and creating new things, and I was able to offer that different visual that were kind of offering different visual mysteries and visual take on different worlds, and jumping from one to another and trying to create a variety of visual differences and palettes and colors and the mysteries in there. I mean, we're not very complicated to create, because once you have a world that is very complex visually, and it's all about cues, visual cues, you pretty much decide what your visual cues are. Are they based on the environment in that way, or is it based on maybe particular messages or language, that is being shown to the player? Is it more the props that carries the mystery? Is it more the environments or the characters or other details? So all that was explored. As you start developing ideas between Anna and I, we just came up with more ideas. I mean, when you have creative people exchanging ideas, usually, it starts generating more and more things in the process. And then other people were involved as well. I mean, it was not just Rand and me, but everyone who wanted to offer some ideas and potential in terms of the story, the narrative, the puzzles, even visually. We always took everything, and my job was to try to combine all that stuff and come up with something that was kind of cool to look at.
We have a question, and just for people on the streams, feel free to ask questions in Discord, on Twitch, on YouTube. We're watching them and collecting them, and we'll ask as many as we can. We have a question from Yali. How did you create the aesthetic style for the Dunny culture, and what defined the style for the Dunny culture?
It was interesting. When I was talking to Rand about what the Dunny looked like, Rand says, well, they're very tall people, very tall, very thin. I think he mentioned something like bony or maybe angular, but that was kind of a basic guidelines. I mean, there was not a particular look per se, more than a basic description that was extracted from the prior stories. So I started exploring, and because the Dunny, I think, were first visually showcased and shown to the players in URU, I was trying to find a way to kind of present them that would be interesting within the legend and the culture that they are. And so there was these ruins and historical artifact that we discovered, and I studied, wouldn't that be cool to represent them in a context of old parchment, of almost drawings from a book that was unearthed, and start a first look at the Dunny. So, which was kind of exciting to me, because I say, okay, so if we start from that perspective, then it has to be a drawing. And so I had to draw like I would be or would have been an artist at the time, drawing a portrait of one of the Donny people without necessarily knowing who it was. And then we had a queen and we had a king with a very, very specific story. So I started kind of going back to my drawing roots with charcoals on paper and tried to kind of create drawings that, well, real drawings that would be shown as well, and then try to play with, different colors and treatments to create something unique. But I think what guided me, which you can see in a few drawings in the website, these very elongated, thin people, that was the godlike from Rens. They had to be that way. After that, it's whatever you want, whether they have a beard or not, whether they have long hair. But the costume also, I think, was an aspect he mentioned, that, very, very strong, high angular shoulder, look almost like they're trying to make themselves disproportionate from a human anatomy. So that makes them very different. So that was also a feature I was paying attention to, especially when I was doing the king. So that was pretty much, how the visual style came about.
I think he was also interested in the aesthetic style of the city and their technology and so forth.
Oh yes, well that was more part of the world and the environments more than the characters. Obviously, that was extremely complex because yes, there was that city that was a big part of the puzzle, and trying to come up with a language of signs and almost like hieroglyphs and patterns that would be very challenging, but also would have their own particular signatures. So I had to kind of think, a lot about, okay, so at some point I think there was a huge, if I remember, kind of telescope machine done. It's a big room in the center of that city. Tried to come up with something wild, that would be intriguing. You look at it, says, what is this? What is it supposed to do? And of course, that's the point. It's like, what is it supposed to do? You're supposed to find out, but it has to be kind of crazy looking. To that point, I've always been a big fan, and I think Ryan too. The Riven is a very good example of that styling that he started. Has a steampunk kind of flavor to the world, and I'm a big fan of steampunk, technology and what could be, and the new and the old, that kind of mingle together. So. And then, because you talk about steampunk, you often talk about clockwork, an intricate gear system mechanism, which was perfect because, Myst and Riven, it's all about that. You push a lever and things start to move around and make noise and stuff. So it's perfectly that. So it's just a matter of how crazy can you be with machines that would be geared with these kinds of mechanism and be crazy looking, and still in that kind of steampunk flavor. That was just the excitement that every single time we had to create something new, whether it's a machine or even a world. The machine were particularly complex and required a lot of thought process. And even sometimes, I got to be honest, without necessarily knowing how it works, but you can always find a way when you have something very complex looking and you don't see everything, and it has an inside mechanism that you might not necessarily see. You can always find ways, because at the end, if you don't know, you say, oh, I just push a button and it works. But if you want to be more complex, you say, okay, well, I push a button, that's going to activate something else. Then I go there and activate that and move something else. And then that machine itself could do whatever you'd like it to do. It could rotate, it could just expand, extend, divides, all that stuff is part of the fun of thinking about what something can do from a shape that's very bizarre to start with. And, when you have enough, I think, of a crazy mind, you could come up with, weird stuff all over the place.
We have a pair of sort of linked questions. Matt wants to know, what was your favorite age to work on in URU and Myst V and why? And Robert wants to know, was there something specific in those two games that you worked on that you're most proud of?
Wow, that's a tough question. That is a tough question. I would say, because it just popped in my mind the moment you said that, and I don't know necessarily if it's because it's the same or because it's the answer, but I think it's because I would say the oh shoot, and now see I'm having a blank. The age, you know, the one with these big giant trees, that blue palette.
Kadish Talesa?
Kaddish. Thank you. You see, it's like it's been too long. Kaddish, because I was one of the early one, but also because uh, I had to come up with an idea of a forest. It was a search in that forest that is hiding different places, temples and constructions and things you don't necessarily understand. But also because I wanted to explore something. I was always intrigued about how you visually approach a puzzle solving with a narrative that is going to be helping the process and not complicate the process. And I've always kind of known how to do that when I was approaching, you know, narrative and design when I was doing animation, because you have to find a very efficient way to say something, even if it's in movement. But even if you have a camera at your disposal, you always want to direct your viewer to where the story needs to be. You don't want to confuse, you don't want to do too much. That kind of process about being very clear in your language and in your narration applies the same way with an image. And actually, it's extremely relevant when you do a book cover, which is why I love doing book cover, because you have to extract the essence of the story and infuse everything without confusing, so that you read that very clearly, you know what matters in that image, because you know with a composition and how you play with the elements and the colors and the lights, where you direct the attention of a reader. And Riven was my first experience to try to, okay, so we have a whole world right there that has to be mysterious, and you have to look around all the time to look for clues, but you don't want to get lost. And so I had to start thinking about a language that is iconic, but also very simple. And then you start, when you start thinking about keywords like this, okay, iconic, simple. So what's iconic? Iconic is a shape that you're going to remember. Star Wars being a very good example, who plays an iconic shape that everybody will remember after the film. You know, the X-Wing and the Death Stars and all these very simple shapes that are extremely strong that you remember. So with that same approach, I was trying to think about elements within that forest that is very consistent. It's the glue of the world. You have these strange places, but when you look at these places, you know, they first appear to you very iconic and mysterious, but they're very clear. And the clarity of it is helping you to focus the player in areas of interest. And so if I wanted the player, or Warren says, you know, it's nice if we go this way, or if we follow that path, or we want them to go this way. With iconic and simple shape, you could easily arrange your composition to make sure that what needs to be seen is going to be seen, so that you don't wander around and get lost. So whether it's by a particular color that stands out within a palette that your eyes is going to target right away because it's there, whether it's a shape within a shape that is out of place or is complementing and is dead center or off center, and it's like something that attracts your attention without being complex, but says, oh, there's something unusual in here, because, you know, so it's a whole vocabulary with you know, as part of the design aspect that you learn and exploit and play with to create these different aspects of a narration that can help the journey and help solve the mysteries. I mean, that, and I think that was very successful, at least to me, visually, to create something, you know, extremely complex and realistic, but also try to come up with these different areas that are very mysterious and very iconic, and try to find the narrations and puzzled in there. And then also what was very interesting in there is I had to develop an entire language of signs, which had to be created. And so basically follow that same footsteps of very iconic design to create these very simple hieroglyphs that would be connected to the puzzle. So that was very complete as a work. So I think it's the one that's gonna stand out, the most. I said there was one we never kind of finished that would have been super exciting, is that Mystery Islands of the Magicians. We started it and then it never kind of fully went there, but there was so much crazy stuff because we talk about abstractions and a world upside down and things that are hidden in your face. I mean, there was so much fun stuff when I started working on that. I never got to really push it. Aside from that, I think everything else I've done, I mean, was exciting in one way or another, whether it was because of the language that needed to be explored, I mean, for example, doing these cave paintings for the Barrow, that whole language that had to be created, which kind of forces me to develop also a graphic style that looked like they were carvings on rocks, and had a whole story and tell the whole in a way that's cryptic, but gives clue. That was extremely challenging. So it came up all these different, kind of lyric that tells a story like a cave painting, like an old caveman painting, with simple drawings, but each drawing is really carefully thought of because it says something. And if you look carefully, then you'll understand. But if you don't, it's okay, because you can move on and then things will make sense later if you take the time to come back and analyze, which is what, you have to do with hieroglyphs when they first discovered them in Egypt. They didn't make much sense, but people could see, maybe it's a bird. Maybe if it's a bird, does it means bird, fly? The whole idea of trying to figure out, what that means, was very intriguing.
Speaking about Kadish, actually, this one's from me. What was the collaborative process like with the 3D artists? Because looking at your art books, looking at the concept art for Kadish, for example, what's in the game looks almost identical in some views to what's in your concept art. And so was there a back and forth to try to get something that worked in 3D?
Yeah, there was less than I thought, actually, from other games that I worked after that. Here, what was interesting is we were trying to develop a new technology. It was not going to be like Myst or Riven. I mean, we're talking about an open world. It's an MMO. So there was a technology to figure out. And within that technology, to understand also what can we do visually and how far can we push the visual to get the maximum effect, out of it. So there was a process of discovering for me as well as for the team. So my role, or at least my take on the very beginning, because of my experience in film and in animations and narrative and the way I work, which is very, very realistic, I was trying to offer the maximum possibility visually, without necessarily knowing that we could reach that, but at least to inspire the team to go there, to try to go there. So to me, it was more important than just give them a sketch and say, figure it out, and then go from there, and then they figure it out. And there's a back and forth process, which, I've done after that with other types of games, because, there is a very strong technology that supports the aspect of surprising you as an art director. But in that case, because everybody was kind of discovering and creating a kind of a new type of engine, I was trying to give them a lot and see what happened, to see if it's really possible. And sure enough, I mean, we were able to really offer a visual that was very, very close, to the painting. And even sometimes, I have to be honest, even beyond. I mean, the more we were progressing in the game and the more we understood, the potential and the visual aspect of it, the more we realized we could do stuff we hadn't necessarily thought about. And then some of the guys were surprising me and says, look, I find that cool effect that we could implement, in that area here, or, we could do as much with the textures, or we could do this and that. And so that inspires me in return. So it says, okay, so if we could do that, maybe on the next world, I can take advantage of that technology, of that aspect of the visual that really looks good because we understand it very clearly, and focus something, that would be really feature that, so that was a kind of a teamwork. And what I enjoy a lot, because San was a small team, you know, and everybody was on the same page. I mean, everybody there loved, what they were doing. I mean, it's like you have to love that particular, game to do your best. It's not just a job. I mean, you could look at it this way, but I mean, these people were really motivated. They loved it. They've been there for a long time. I mean, I was one of the last because I was doing other stuff, but I was in all the way because I was already a big fan. I could see myself participating and adding to it with my sense of visual and what I could offer. So you had to be completely 200% dedicated. And that's what creates that amount of quality, and beauty at the end of a project. I think it's very important. So because you had a small team, everybody was really open and sharing, and there was no like, I do my stuff, you do your stuff, and everybody follows kind of a path of process that could be kind of stale and boring. I mean, everybody here was very involved and very excited about, wanting to move forward every step of the way. At least, that's how I felt it, for 5 years.
This question's a little off to the side, but I know Capello will get mad at me if I don't ask it. What sort of work did you do with the Star Wars theme park and on Star Wars?
The theme park. I worked on the one that was to be, actually, I try to remember because I worked on two different ones. The one in Florida, not in Florida. Yeah, the one in Florida, or was it LA? I can't remember because at the time they were not quite sure. There was one in Paris for sure, I know. So I worked with two different teams. They were trying to develop that park that opened, last year or a couple of years ago. I mean, that was what. So I was one of the artists kind of asked to come up with visual ideas for some of the attractions and the retail stores and the different areas of the park. And it was very blue sky because there was nothing really set in stone at that point. So, it's interesting because working on a project like this was actually in some way very similar to working on URU because you're already familiar with the visual language. It's already there. And if you're already a fan of it, being creative is not necessarily very complicated because it's not like you have to come up with something that's never been seen before. It's extremely challenging and could be, crazy to figure out. Here you had a visual language, but that been established for years, and I was already a big fan of Star Wars. So when he asked me to work and come up with, an idea for a bar, coming for an idea for a rest area, a ride here, or the building, that looks like this or that, I always had visual elements to kind of be able to draw upon. But yeah, I mean, theme park, I mean, it's very consistent. When you work on a theme park, you have a few rides in an area, you have a retail area, and you have a shops, and you have a restaurants, and then you have the layout of the path of the park itself and how people navigate from one area to another. It's pretty straightforward. And when you have a look that's already clearly established, then you draw upon that and you create a visual that's going to be as all visual you have to create as a concept artist, exciting, compelling, so that people enter and they feel like they're in the world and they want to go further in and they want to go explore. So, and the two parks were different. I mean, the area I worked in, the one for Paris, were mostly based on Tatooine. So there was all desert-like, similar to the village that's in Tunisia, which was, where they filmed, the film. So very desert palette-like. The other one that I worked on in the US was more jungle-like. We talked about the rebel base. Which you see in the park right now, the Millennium Falcon kind of landed, in its own secret spot, which was going to become an attraction, and the whole ruin area where they're hiding. And then the whole area, as you enter the jungle to the rebel area with the pyramid that were used as, the base, at least for that particular idea or concept, the hangar bay pyramid, ancient pyramid that was the hideout of the rebels. This one didn't make it because I believe way too big, way too expensive. But you have to explore that to know that. So these were the two main areas that I was involved, in doing concept for.
Capella, I hope that answered your question. Robert wants to know, did you give any thought and design to the residential spaces of the Dunny City and URU, whether or not they made it into the game? So obviously we had a couple of neighborhoods in the public spaces, but I think this is more about private residential spaces.
Yes and no. I mean, I was aware that there was going to be, different places where players, as they are unearthing, the Donny city and discovering more and more about what the Donny civilization used to be, that we had to come up with a plan that was large enough in that cave to accommodate everything. So yes, so your the areas of, and I think if I'm not mistaken, there was an area that asking you to get into one of these private spaces that you have to find particular clues, but not really in depth. I think that the depth, at least for me visually, was more about these very intricate, complicated area of machines and mechanism and all that kind of stuff. The room, I did not get involved into developing, a particular language, though, because there was already a language developed for the entire area. I'm sure that helped a lot to define what a smaller space would be. And I'm sure with Rand's guidance, about understanding, how they live inside their own apartment or house, that it was easy to follow and create something that just makes sense with the rest of it.
Lana wants to know, was your artistic direction informed at all by the written descriptions of Dunny in the companion novels? And did you read the novels that came alongside Myst?
No, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, that came after.
Oh.
When we started working on the Dunny, I think, I don't remember that there was already that much material. All I was really given as a guidance, if I remember, was just the physical aspect of the Dunny in their big lines, big physical aspect. But if there was anything else, honestly, maybe I forgot. But I don't remember, honestly, that there was, a large amount of information that gave me, a specific direction for what I created in terms of, the city itself.
Did you work on any character concepts, or was it generally environment concepts only?
Yeah, no, I did work on the king and the queen. Obviously, they had to be kind of physically shown as to what they were. And then some of the magistrates and other people. And then I worked as well on Isha. We had to create her for the following, iteration of the game. So we had to create that unique female character that had to have, many very unique attributes and personalities. So that was very exciting to come up with that character. And then there was a bunch of other characters that were part of, I can't remember, like sage magistrates. There was, I think, about 5 or 6 of them that come up at some point in one of the world. Tried to develop some very interesting costumes. The same way, I tried to come up with very interesting environments. Costumes is a thing I always love to do anyway. So yeah, there was these guys, to create. And I have to say that creating characters was more challenging for the game than creating environments, because the technology was more challenging, because now that you have a character that moves, we didn't have as much at our disposal in terms of high resolutions and being able to create what we did for the environments, as well for characters. So we always knew that there was going to be a certain amount of sacrifice to make visually, because they had to move, they had to be, functional. So that was more of a challenge, to try to come up with characters that are not too crazy, because if it's too crazy, that might not look good, but that feel they have the right amount of information and costumes and elements, so that they're doable, and you could play without an issue. That was fun. It's like not a lot, not as much as the environment, of course, but yeah, when there was a need and they were important and interesting, I was able to kind of work on some of them.
I just had one. Where to go? So you mentioned that you played Myst and Riven beforehand, before you joined Cyan, but Klamis wants to know how interested you were in video games in general before you played Myst and Riven, or before you joined Cyan.
Oh, it's well, as I was mentioning before, at the time of Myst, the entire game industry was these little Donkey Kong, Mario Brothers, and little fight games, on these consoles in game arcades. I mean, that was the game industry right there. There was no PlayStation at home and big TV screens and sound blasting. No, that was really the beginning. Myst was, even as simple of a game as it was, when you look back at it, it was still way beyond the Donkey Kong and the Mario Brothers. So I was never interested in games from a visual perspective, because as an artist, I could not see a connection between that and what I do, especially as a concept artist, when you're supposed to create this very elaborate painting. The game industry was not prepared and not ready, technologically, to be able to, assume, that kind of visual. So I was playing game. I love playing games, but I was playing game as a gamer. And then even when Myst happened, Myst was not even a challenge visually. It was fun. It was different. I could see that it was a step up in the technology, but compared to what I was producing at the time in theme park and film, in terms of visual content, there was no connection still. It's really Riven that changed that. Riven, when it came out, was the first time of a game was showcasing visual to a level that now told me, wow, I could be doing stuff for that. I could see myself as an artist developing concept and paintings for games like that, because they have the technology to make that happen. The resolution and the beauty of these images were just striking. And that's how I got interested in that. Says, wow. But not interested like I got to jump into it, but interested enough to say, oh, this is happening. You got to watch, because this is it. This is a turning point. And sure enough, it's right after that Cyan put that ad in Cinefx looking for an art director. And so the timing was just perfect. I had already all that experience, animations and films and other aspects. And Cyan puts up that ad looking for an art director for exactly the kind of experience that I had before, because that game was exactly what they were looking for. They were looking for someone that was not coming from the game industry. And that was a big thing to understand, because the game industry being so technical, and gamey, because everybody was coming from that, background of, very simplistic kind of type technology. Rand really wanted to push the envelope and especially create something narrative, extremely narrative. It had to be. So he was looking for an artist that not only had the experience of creating art, and doing it well, but also had an experience in storytelling. And the fact that I had worked as a director and an art director, full-fledged, doing everything, storyboard and stuff, and I was very into storytelling, during the whole path of my career, all the way to Riven, made me a perfect candidate. So when I came in, I think Rand understood very clearly that it's not just pretty pictures that I try to do, it's pictures that have meanings, and pictures that tell stories. And since I was already a big fan of, the Riven. It was not very difficult for me to kind of say, well, I'd work with you, no problem, and that sure enough, Ren says, you're in. It's like, let's get you in and let's show you what we're working on. And that was the beginning of, 5 years of crazy stuff to do.
Kefrith asks, and it seems like a lot of other people want to know, whose idea was it to put the tattoo on Yisha's face?
I would say, I would say me, but then if Ren did it, then he's going to be mad at me. So I can't remember, honestly. I can't remember. If it was I know there was a back and forth process and I proposed a whole bunch of stuff, but who came up with that? I'll have to ask Rand. Rand might know if it was me or him, but I don't remember. Yeah.
Well, we can ask him again tomorrow during the URU panel with Rand.
Exactly. I think he might have the answer to it. He might have a better memory than I do. Yeah.
Mr. J asks, can you describe your creative process? Is there a certain pipeline, and what are the steps and techniques you apply and come up with ideas and refine them further?
Yes, that's a very good question, actually. Yeah, I do have a process, and that's a process I teach, doing actually a class right now for schoolism, talking exactly about that process of how you create a compelling and a very narrative image. One of the first thing I would say is when Rand approached me with an idea for a world, and he says, this is what matters in this world. For example, Kaddish, I want a forest, a magical, crazy, mysterious forest. And this is kind of ancient, culture and people who used to live there. And this is the artifact that we might be finding there and a kind of clue and stuff. The first thing I do is I try to extract the keywords of what makes that story the story. And so that's the first vocabulary that I'm using. And from these keywords, then I start researching. And I got to say, and I've always told, everyone and all the students out there, research is key to a good concept. And I've learned that with the advent of the internet, because before that, you only had access to library, and to be able to access libraries with thousands of books that are available and having the time, to do that, it's not necessarily very easy. So I was educated, with very little at my disposal in terms of understanding the wealth of material, visual material that existed out there, because of not having the time to just sit in libraries all the time and discover all these painters and artists and architects and what have you. But the internet changed all that. The internet made all that stuff accessible and beyond. And when that happened, then you realize searching for keywords and imagery became, more and more easy. And so when I start having a base vocabulary of keywords that define the story, and I do the same when I do book covers, I try to extract what the story is supposed to be, what's important for the viewer to understand before they even read the book. But because the title is there, but the image complements that title. Well, for all it's the same. You have a mystery, you're trying to kind of convey a particular narrative. And so to do it right, then I start researching. And all the images that kind of come out of this vocabulary of words are the images that are going to be the process that is going to start the visual process. Because as you're seeing it, you know very quickly what relates to what you understood or what was written about the story. But because you research, you always don't know until you see it. So it forces you to keep on researching, because you also realize as an artist, you're only limited by what you know. And there's a wealth of information you don't. And if you accept the fact that, you have to be humble enough to understand that you might know 1% and think you know 1%, but out there's stuff you had no idea, existed visually or existed at all in terms of concept or things like that. And you become curious to find out. And now you have to have, you have a use of a vocabulary to help you in that process. You're going to find tons of stuff that you didn't think you would find. And that's the process for me. And so when you start gathering all these images, ends up with folders of images, then you start, at some point, because you have to work. I mean, it's like I try to give myself a day or two of research to really absorb and gather everything that I can find on the subject from different perspective, because remember, each word could lead you in a path that is completely different from the other. I mean, you type mysterious, just like as an example, then suddenly a type of images might come up. You type mood, you type temple, ancient signage, and things like that. A lot of stuff are going to come up. You take it all, then you dissect, and then you start to infuse your own artistic sense. Okay, so now I have about language, and even sometimes you might find references and images that totally vibes with how you feel visually that you would want to approach something, and you take it and you expand from it. And sometimes you don't, because it's a detail or an element, and you use that and you infuse it maybe in part of your design. But it's that material that starts that process of creation. So you start sketching, you start doodles and stuff. So I knew in Kaddish that I wanted to explore that language of hieroglyph and signage, that would be based on very iconic, imagery. Well, these were keywords, that I researched. At some point I says, okay, hieroglyphs, just to get a sense about how hieroglyphs are being, designed, from the simplest one to the most complex one, and how you can apply that kind of visual idea to something completely different, but still relates to the idea of an ancient, language by sign. And as you go, obviously you as an artist, you obviously at some point develop your own artistic sense and personality and technique. So, but these are tools. These are tools that you adapt to a process of research and extractions, and then you propose ideas, and as you share them with Rand and the rest of the team, you get feedback, and you use that feedback to move on to the next iteration of ideas that works better for the narrative, that works better for this or that, and you come up with something kind of exciting and cool, hopefully, at the end.
Okay, we have about 2 or 3 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure I get a chance to ask this for folks. Before we started the stream, you and I were talking about, you said people should always feel free to come ask artists questions and don't feel intimidated. And I was wondering if you have advice for aspiring artists, people who want to break into the games industry or the film industry, or the theme park industry.
Well, that question comes all the time, comes up all the time. So it's not an awkward question. For anyone wanting to break in the industry, I mean, the first thing I say is what industry, because the art industry is so large. Being a concept artist for film has nothing to do with being a concept artist for game, which is also different from doing book covers, or being an artist in other aspects of the industry. So try to narrow down what it is that you want to do, where you see yourself, and I always try to tell people is if you project yourself in 5 or 10 years, where are you doing? What are you doing? And then that can arouse down, the interest of that person. So let's say you want to break into the film industry, for example, because a lot of people, want to do that. Then you research how it's done, and you start talking to people, like I said. And so you talk to people say, well, how do you talk to people? How do I see these people? I say, then you do research, and then you realize, that there is this convention, and there are conventions all over the US and the world right now. And so the Comic-Con being one of them, but there is some in Atlanta, some in LA. I mean, there's tons of convention. And usually this is where the artists will be, and if if they don't have a booth there, you'll find them there. And by starting a process of reaching out to people, talking to people, now you have online as well, website, you can send an email. There used to be a time where for me to reach someone, I had to go and walk with my portfolio under my arm to knock on doors, not really knowing where people were. That was very difficult. But these days with the internet and the research and all these conventions out there everywhere, finding the information and reaching out to friends and other professionals in the industry, you always get an answer. You can always get to talk to someone who's going to give you an information that's going to help the process. And then people will explain to you how you break in that particular industry. So I'm not going to go into detail since, I'm running out of time, but pretty much every industry has a way of approaching it. Theme, you have to do this and that's very, very specific on how you approach and how you break in, but that's completely different for game. How you break into the game is a completely different pathway. But once you do research and you talk to the right people and you know where they are, game industry, even more than film, E3, GDC, all these big conferences where all these guys are, you go there, you talk, you see them. If you can talk to them, try to reach them online, through chat, through their website, through their blog. A lot of them blog, they talk and they're willing to share. Some of them teach, so reaching people to understand how each aspect of the industry is being approached. That's how you do it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today. I wish we had another 2 hours to talk to you, but if people do have more questions specifically about Myst V and URU, you can check the Mysterium schedule on mysterium.net. There's a 2-hour panel tomorrow, and Stephan will be there as well. And in about a half an hour, we also have a panel with Stephan and several other game developers talking about game development. So be sure to bring your questions there, but we're going to leave it at that. So thank you, Stephan, and thank you everyone for your great questions.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.